You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast, the hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com. Wow, I just kind of upstage here no matter what I do. For 14 years, I had to sing that line, and now we finally hired somebody to do it because God knows it was just too much work doing on the show. But, yeah, she does a great job. Welcome to the show, my family and friends. As always, the Chris Voss Show is the family that loves you but doesn't judge you, at least not as harshly as that one cousin who gives you those dirty looks every Thanksgiving because, I don't know, they just don't like the way you look. Most people don't either. Sorry to tell you this, but the best way to improve your looks is listen to the Chris Voss Show, or refer to your family and friends. Go to Do we do that? Go to Goodreads.com/Chris Voss, YouTube.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, and I don't know. I may have said one of those twice. We have an amazing author who's joining us on the show. His latest book came out December 6th, 2023. He's going to inspire you, motivate you, and teach you how to live a better life. And if you don't like it, or else, I don't know what that means. I just like to do that on the show. The title of his book is called Live Ready, A Guide to Protecting Yourself in an Uncertain World. Sam Rosenberg is joining us on the show today. We'll be talking about his book. And, there's some different uncertainty that goes on in the world with some bad people. And so he's a guy who can give us advice on how to avoid those people. Particularly, I need some help with Facebook people, evidently, right now. They're really annoying, but I'm not sure that's his fear. But we'll find out. He is an author, speaker, and internationally recognized expert on personal security. He's dedicated his life to protecting people and teaching them how to protect themselves. Sam served as an officer in the U.S. Marine Corps and in the private sector as a close protection specialist for some of the world's highest profile individuals, including notables such as Tom Cruise, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Warren Buffett. Since 2003, he's empowered tens of thousands from families to Fortune 100 companies with the skills and mindset elite close protection specialists use to protect public figures. He's the author of the latest book we aforementioned, the inventor of the response pen, patent pending, or patent actually. It's looks like it's there. I was just getting lazy. I didn't want to read the patent number code that's in the 9 millions. And his guidance on preventing and responding to violence is routinely sought by news, media, podcasts, and influencers nationally. Welcome to the show, Sam. How are you?
I'm great, Chris. Thanks for having me. Honored to be here.
It's wonderful to have you as well. Thank you for your service. Semper Fi. My brother was a Marine.
Semper Fi.
Does that count if I'm kind of, I mean, I'm not a Marine. I would never claim to be, but does it count if I'm kind of in the family a little bit?
Close enough, brother.
Cool, we have a lot of respect for the military services around here. Give us your .coms. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
Best place is livereadybook.com. That's really the best direction. It's the portal into my whole, workplace and everything that we do, training, preparedness, intelligence, all that. livereadybook.com.
There you go. So give us a 30,000 overview. What's inside your new book?
Well, Chris, just as a quick background on my perspective on the subject matter, I appreciate that bio read. Basically, I spent the last, 25 plus years protecting people and teaching them how to protect themselves. I believe that for me, it's good to have a lifeguard, but ultimately you should know how to swim. Yeah. So, when I decided to write this book, it was actually quite a long time ago, but I wasn't really ready for it. So I wrote it over the last few years, and it really is the summation of all of the most important lessons learned, protecting people, teaching them, working with individuals, dealing with difficult situations over the last 25 years. And it really addresses two basic themes that are the same themes in the book, are the same themes in a lot of the training that we do as an organization. Mm-hmm. And those themes are basically what I call the myth of helplessness and the myth of randomness. Oh. Basically, the idea that violence really is never random and you are never helpless. even in the face of extreme situations.
Mhm.
And, from the standpoint of randomness, we see this all the time. I just saw this yesterday where, Steve Buscemi got punched in the face,
Oh yeah.
and, all the news reports, active random violence and all this. And I'm not suggesting that this type of an attack is not indiscriminate, but the words are very important. Violence always has a purpose and meaning to the perpetrator, and it is a process as easy to see and observe and predict in some cases as boiling water, if you know what to look for and are in a position to see the signs.
Definitely. And so, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. There's a lot of crazy people in the world. I think you probably know that. I don't have to tell it to you, so I'll just tell it to the audience. Have you seen newspapers from Florida, man? But there's I remember, I think I was watching the other day on Bill Maher, and I think I was trying to think about inviting her on the show, but she was a journalist, and she's like a really good looking skinny little lady that you don't want to be beating up. You don't want to beating up any ladies, but like she doesn't look like somebody that can take on a fight. Like when I go get a massage, I get those burly ladies, so they can really get in there. Like they could probably fight me, but this is like a little skinny little news lady, and she famously got punched in the face on the New York subway, which I think isn't that a rite of passage? Isn't that just they give it to everybody?
Yeah.
Or did they just
Maybe nowadays?
It's one of those two. I was getting mixed up. But violence can come in a lot of different ways. People that are predators. I never really knew what it was like to be in the sights of a predator until I got in the sights of a predator at least once or twice in my life. And it's, and I'm a big guy. I'm 6'2". I got a lot of weight to me to throw around and pin down, and I walk around with an angry bitch face most of the time. But no, man, when you're in the line of sight of a predator and you're kind of trapped with them for a while, it's horrifying. It's dangerous. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, in Live Ready in this book, and throughout a lot of my training, we talk about there are really only three kinds of types of bad guys out there. I actually call them the 3 Ps. There's the professionals, predators, and potential bad guys. And understanding their MO, understanding how they select their targets and why, and how they go about their business, really it gives you an understanding and the ability to see those warning indicators coming, and it gives you a degree of predictability. And more importantly, it gives you an idea of how to manage it. So one of the great truths, whether we're talking about predatory bad guys who are basically defined in many ways by opportunity, they're looking for the right opportunity. And what that means is they're fundamentally looking for a soft target. They're looking for a target that cannot or will not fight back. And this doesn't mean that everybody has to be physically capable of defending themselves or carry a firearm or anything like that. What it really means is that to be ready is to be willing and able to defend yourself. Now, the willingness is a state of mind. Readiness is a statement of fact. So I'm a big advocate for people seeking some level of training or preparedness. But the concept is even just being situationally aware and knowing what to look for and how to look and when to look, so you don't burn yourself out, but knowing when to switch on. It takes you off the menu in many ways, just being a good observer and being an observer of people. The problem is, even when we talk about the most fundamental elements like situational awareness, I see people all the time and they say, look, Sam, I pay attention to my environment. What do I need any specialized training for? But paying attention is literally just the prerequisite. You got to know more details. How do you read people? How do you recognize when they are in fact reading you and trying to determine if you could be a target? If I can share just a quick tip, with our listeners, I like to summarize it like this, and I don't take credit for it. One of my clients in New York City actually, said it this way best, and I try to give credit that way, even though he doesn't like me to mention his name. He says, Sam, I summarize your situational awareness training like this. He says, when people come to New York City, I always tell them there's 3 kinds of people in the city. The people who are looking up, they're the tourists. He says, then there's the people who are looking down, they're the New Yorkers. And then there's the people who are looking for who's looking up and who's looking down. And he says, they're the ones you want to pay attention to. And, the reality is that there's a very simple logic here to take away from this, which is you got to watch for the watchers. And, when you actually become a watcher and you spot another watcher watching you, it's like two predators arriving at the watering hole. There's easier targets.
Yeah.
So, in many ways, that's very important.
I guess there's some truth to that. I think I learned this a long time ago somewhere in my travels that you don't want to look like a mark, and you want to look like you're very aware of your surroundings. It's that person that's kind of oblivious. Maybe they're stuck in their phone.
Yep.
Maybe they look weak or silly or, I'm lucky enough that I have resting bitch face most of the time and look like I want to kick someone's ass because I probably do want to half the time. I'm just moody that way. But I have situational awareness. I watch rooms and I watch people, and I'm not paranoid. I'm actually curious about people because that's why I do the show. But I also, we've kind of gone in this world to where I'm not so much worried about the Middle Eastern immigrant that's at the coffee shop. I'm worried about guys who look like me from white nationalism. Angry 50-year-olds who got a gun and they got they watch Fox TV too many times. That's the people that I'm usually watching for when I'm looking around. I'm looking at that I don't know. Incels mostly stick to school shootings as well. We'll get into that. So is that true that trying to not look like a mark makes a difference?
Yeah, I mean, you said a lot there. I definitely think, Chris, that, not looking like a mark is a good thing. How do you do that? Mm-hmm. Right? Well, what we have to understand about when the way we communicate with other people is a vast majority of it is nonverbal. Mm-hmm. And, one of the typical points of, sort of advice that I hear self-defense coaches telling people is walk like you have a purpose, look like you know where you're going, blah, blah, blah. The reality is this, okay? I'm going to give you a little model, all right? The way bad guys operate, whether they're professional levels like terrorists, school shooters, workplace shooters, what have you, which, by the way, are all terrorists. The only real difference is ideology. One might be politically motivated, another one might be personally motivated. Whether they're predators looking to do rape, robbery, assault, some combination thereof, or they're potential bad guys who are just having a bad day. Right. And, you have someone who is affected by situational factors. They're drunk, they're high, their girlfriend just dumped them, they lost their job, whatever the volatility is that you're not aware of.
That's me on Fridays.
Yeah. I mean, it could be any one of us, right? Anyone on a bad day, regardless of what we're talking about in terms of the modalities of bad guys, they all go through the same process. And I call it time. It's the timeline of violence: target selection, intelligence gathering, method of attack, and then escape or exploitation. Mm-hmm. Now, if we look at 9/11 as an example, okay, like the 9/11 terrorists, if you imagine before the attack, one of them says, hey guys, I got a great idea. Let's target the World Trade Center. So we have a proposed target. Mm-hmm. Another one says, let's fly an airplane into the building. Now we have a proposed method of attack. Okay. Well, They don't just go for it because they haven't vetted the plan. They have no idea whether this plan is going to work or not. So they enter into what we call the eye of time. And in the eye of time is when they're doing all of their sort of like intelligence work. They're doing their pre-operational planning, their training, research, testing and probing of the target, surveillance, you name it, rehearsals. When they are satisfied that their plan has merit, then the M of time turns from that method of attack to what I call the moment of commitment, where they make their intention known. The attack is launched. Mm-hmm. If they win, maybe they escape. If they don't, if it's a suicide mission, maybe the Al-Qaeda takes credit, says, hey, we did this, be afraid, we could do it again. Mm-hmm. The idea, though, is that if we look at this model and we understand a couple of basics, right? And I'll ask you the question, Chris, you think street criminals do the same thing?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
They do. It just happens in a more compressed timeline.
Yeah.
So, the principle is, it may only take moments where we know looking back, 9/11, the eye of time took 5 years, but the reality is it may only take a few moments to assess you, but there's still an assessment process where they're going to come up and talk to you. Hey, can I talk to you for a sec? Or they follow you for a little bit, or they give you a hard stare, across the subway. Whatever the dynamic is, that is that testing and probing moment, what we have to recognize is that we are in fact in the eye of time. all right, and that we are now being what I call interviewed. Now, the entire purpose of that interview is to determine if you will make a good, soft target or if you're too hard of a target to take on, all right, for whatever their purpose is. Target selection has already occurred. You are already being targeted.
Wow.
Right. So the problem you have is most people mismanage that eye of time. They don't recognize what's really going on. They want to believe that it is actually what they're seeing and what they're experiencing is not real. They go into a type of what I call normalcy bias, where they say normalcy bias being defined as wanting things to be normal, even to the direct contrary of the evidence in front of you. Okay. Or they go into that social contract mode, which is kind of what you were talking about, where you say, well, I'm not worried about the Islamic fundamentalist. I'm worried about the white supremacist. To me, I think both of those mentalities are flawed. Okay. We shouldn't be looking at anyone from the standpoint of any kind of demographic profile. What we should be looking at is information, right? What does this person's body language tell me? What does my intuition tell me? What does my radar telling me when the hair goes up on the back of my neck? Whether the guy's a 50-year-old white guy or a 35, military aged male, from Syria, right? It doesn't matter. We have to be looking at the actual information that is there. And this is what I call visual intelligence. You know what I mean? You got to be able to look and see what's really happening there and to recognize those warning indicators of the eye of time. One of them being that the guy's a watcher. He's watching you. Okay. Another one, for example, just to throw some more information the way of our listeners and our viewers is, every place has a purpose. Okay. So like you're going to to a store, you park the car, you go in, you come out, that parking lot has a purpose. Well, if you're looking at a parking lot and you see, as you're scanning and you see someone hanging around that parking lot that is not using that environment for its designated purpose, which is generally to go in, come out, drive away, you can pretty quickly tell, are they there waiting for a ride or are they watching people coming and going?
Yeah.
Right. So layering these two ideas of watching for watchers and understanding that every place has a purpose gives you an immediate advantage to recognize what's going on here. Should I stay away from this? Should I raise my alert level? Does that make sense?
It certainly does. Yeah.
And it's completely irrespective of the race, color, creed, whatever of the person. I get concerned with people who sort of are looking for those things because in the greatest sense of the word, we only find the world we're looking for.
Close out the other parts.
Yeah.
That selective vision. Yeah. That is one thing I do notice is if people are acting strangely or acting out of place in a certain area, or like you said, in that environment, and if they're shifty and different things. So your advice is well taken. Let's get into your bio because we usually like to talk to what your upbringing is.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about you and your upbringing, what got you into security and into the field you're in now.
Yeah. So if I can share a story about it, I'll tell you exactly how I got into this. So it's kind of funny. I mean, I was back in the early 90s, which when I say that, I always feel like such an old man nowadays when, it seems like a million years ago. But I was at the University of Pittsburgh. I was going to Pitt. I was a wrestler, and a buddy of mine came up to me and he says, "Hey, Sam, do you want a job where you could meet lots of girls but get paid next to nothing?" And I said, "Of course." So next thing I know, I'm working as a bouncer in a college bar. Okay. And, I'm on my second shift literally. And I remember very distinctly that the sort of crisis response plan for this organization that was taught to me was like explained like this is, okay, you guys are hanging out in the vestibule. If there's trouble in the bar, we're going to flash the lights in the vestibule, come running in and figure it out. Right. So this is not a plan. All right. But I didn't know any better at the time. And I thought of myself as a tough guy. And here I am. I'm sitting in there on my second shift, checking IDs. It was a Friday night. The place is jammed and the lights flash. So me being the gung-ho guy that I am, I got to be the first one through the door. Okay. So I start making my way through the crowd at this fight that's going on. And there was this, like, what looked like in my 20-year-old brain, I'm not even old enough to drink in the bar, would look like this older guy getting the better of this college kid. Okay. Now this guy was probably not even 40. Okay. But looked like an older guy. I pushed the older guy off the college kid and I pinned the college kid to the bar because I didn't want him to come back swinging. And my assumption was my fellow bouncer who was right behind me would come around and grab this guy. Well, he hesitated. The older guy didn't. He kind of bounced off the crowd a foot away, whips a gun out of his waistband, sticks it in my face. And he says, "Now I'm going to kill you." All right. So, yeah. So, and you know how they say like your life flashes before your eyes, Chris? Yeah. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
I can tell you that my life has never flashed before my eyes. Okay. Not in this situation or any other ones I think would objectively qualify as life and death. What did happen though was very interesting. My brain instantly jumped back to a memory, this flashback memory of when I was like 12 years old or something, having a conversation with my dad. All right. I was doing karate at the time or something. And I said, "Hey, Dad, what do I do if a guy's got a gun?" And his answer to me in this sort of well-meaning but ultimately unhelpful way was, "Do whatever the guy with the gun tells you." All right. And, I instantly fast forward to this moment. And the problem was the guy's not telling me to do anything. So the computer program that I'd put in, this sort of like hardwiring of like, what do I do if this happens? If this, then that. It just completely broke down and it didn't compute. And as you might imagine, I just froze, right? It was like this kind of, pardon my language, a big fat oh shit moment. You know what I mean? And, it was the first time, even though I was like, I'd done martial arts, I was a competitive wrestler, Division I, all this kind of stuff. I'd never had a situation where I was adrenalized to the point where like everything got quiet and all I could see was the barrel of the gun and it looked about this big. And this hesitation moment, this paralysis response felt like it lasted minutes, even though it was probably just a few seconds. But I mean, I realized consciously, there's the inner dialogue when this is going on that, something's got to change here, right? I got to do something. This is thoroughly unproductive. So I looked around the gun at the guy's face and his body language indicated to me it wasn't going to shoot me in the face, right? He kind of overreacted. So I grabbed the gun and we kind of negotiated our way out of it,
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't like there was any good technique. I didn't know anything at the time. I got lucky. Nobody got shot. It was fine. But what was interesting about this little moment and why I'm sharing this story with you is because, a little while later, I'm back in the vestibule and we're trying to go back to work and look real cool. Like we know what we're doing and it's no big deal. And, my buddy turns to me and he goes, "Sam, I've been thinking about this. They're paying us like $35 a night before taxes for this job." He goes, "This isn't worth it." And he had done his little risk assessment and that was the end of it. Right. My brain didn't go there. What it did was it got hung up on a question, Chris. And what that question was what the hell just happened here? Why is it that everything that I thought I knew about violence in its management was instantly demonstrated to be false? And the first realization I had was that it was not my body that had failed me. I was bigger, stronger, faster, younger than the guy I was dealing with. I was in great shape, all that kind of stuff. None of that mattered. What had failed me was my mind, my ability to make decisions and to think and to process what was going on. And I realized that, I started thinking about it and I realized that, I'd certainly read stories and books and whatever about people who could think and make good decisions under pressure. And I wanted to understand what quality did these people have that apparently I did not? And was this something that could be learned? Was it something that could be taught? So I pivoted my college career. I was going to be a school teacher. And instead I decided, I'm going to go figure this out. I'm going to go where the toughest people on the planet were. So I joined the Marines.
That's a tough group.
Yeah. Went through the OCS program, became an officer, realized on my, my first active duty tour that I was thoroughly allergic to bureaucracy. All right. So, I realized, this is not the career path for me. So I took my exit when I could and ended up falling into the close protection world. And, here we are today. So that's kind of the path that I went on. I've always been into martial arts. I've always been into this subject in weird ways. But, for me, it's become a real passion, and I love empowering people. That's what I really enjoy doing.
How many years have you been doing it now?
I started my own business in 2003, and the business I started it because I realized, like I said, it's good to have a lifeguard, but you should know how to swim. And my philosophy was that I wanted to teach people the same skills and tools we use to protect public figures, so they can protect themselves, their families, their workplaces. And I've been really blessed and grateful to be able to train literally tens of thousands of people, from families, to Fortune 100 companies, to Navy SEALs, and everybody in between. And, at the end of the day, it's been a little over 20 years doing this. Prior to that was more the close protection. I was still teaching a little bit and experimenting with things back then, but it's been a little over 20 years of total focus on this. And, it's, and the culmination again is this Live Ready book. I wrote it honestly, Chris, because I want this information out there. And there's so much information in that book that is simply not being taught, or that instructors, as well-meaning as they are, just don't know this information. How to spot trouble, how to recognize when you're being targeted, what to do about it, how to deal with persuasion predators. People use charm. This is stuff that every college kid needs. It's stuff that anybody in the workforce needs.
Yeah.
So,
and some people, some people think that, just buying a gun is the move to make. What do you think is more effective? Like, my nephew came to me one time and he goes, "I'm going to buy a gun." I'm like, "You live in Salt Lake City, Utah. What the hell do you need a gun for? Like, you're not in the inner city. This is like super low crime area. If you want to find crime here, you really have to go work to get it." Now, there's things like what you've talked about where there's predators out there that, you can have a special event, but I think you'd more have a special event here than anything. Usually you've got to be here in Salt Lake. You got to be in some shit to get some shit. I don't know.
Well, what's interesting? Chris, you're the man. I'm not gonna say anything.
You're the pro.
I'm going to tell you this, okay? I have heard from so many people over the years, I hear a recurring theme. And what people say is something along the lines of, "Hey man, I don't go out at night. I don't go to bars. I don't go downtown," right? As if bad things only happen in certain places and in certain, times, and just, under certain circumstances, or to certain people, right?
Yeah.
Bad things happen to anyone from any walk of life in a variety of different contexts. Okay. And I'm not going to belittle the idea that if you live in a safe area, that the likelihood of running into street crime is lower. But the idea here is that at the exact same time that we may not be as much exposed to, say, predatory street crime, like, or being punched in the face in New York City, right? Yeah. People are interacting with people on a regular basis, and there are predatory people out there. There's a lot of people, particularly, for example, if we look at one subset in the news every single day, college campuses, right? Regardless of all the protests and all this kind of nonsense going on, what we're really dealing with here is anytime kids are going into social age, as an example, what I call social age, they're dating, going to parties, exposed to drugs, alcohol, all that kind of stuff. You have to be concerned. There are persuasion-oriented predators and people who use charm and persuasive ability to create opportunities. And you can spot these people as easily as the mugger jumping out of the bushes with a ski mask, if you know what to look for. Okay. And being able to arm kids with that information early on is very important, because how many people do we know, both of us, if you just think about it, have dated the wrong guy, okay, or ended up in a situation where someone was stalking them, or ended up in a domestic violence situation, or there's a myriad of things that can occur that are just bad. If we just look at the statistics, it has no bearing whatsoever. If you're from Salt Lake City, Pittsburgh, New York City, it doesn't matter. 1 in 4 college women gets raped.
Wow.
Right? 1 in 4. All right.
Holy crap.
It's unbelievable. All right. Well, what we have to understand is that this is a very dangerous time in people's lives. And functionally speaking, you could be on the safest college campus and there's still exposure.
Yeah.
I think most people recognize that. Now, you asked me, some people think about turning to a gun as the tool. Here's my opinion on this. Okay. Just to keep it real simple,
Mhm.
Chris, I don't put any emotional value on anything, tools, cars, whatever it is.
Mhm.
A firearm to me is nothing more than a tool, nothing more, nothing less.
Mhm.
Right. And functionally speaking, for some people, a tool is the best solution. They're not physically capable of defending themselves against a bigger, stronger adversary. Okay. They don't have the physical aptitude to be able to learn self defense or the capacity for it. Sometimes they're older people, sometimes they're people with infirmities, you name it. All right. You could have a variety of different conditions that says the best solution for this person is some kind of a tool, whether that tool is pepper spray or, a taser or a firearm or whatever. But a firearm is undeniably an effective self-defense tool, but it requires a lot of training.
Mhm.
And the biggest problem that I have, and I've been involved in some capacity or another in the firearm industry my whole career, whether it's just as an armed protection specialist or as a competitive shooter or you name it, as an instructor. What I can tell you is my biggest beef in this is that most people have a very, very inaccurate understanding of how much training is required to use that tool under high stress. And they'll spend money on the best tool possible, but they don't spend money and time on training. And that has to be the first step.
Yeah.
So I'm not opposed to anybody understanding how to use a gun and basically, choosing that as a defensive instrument.
Mhm.
You got to remember that training comes first.
Yeah.
The second component to that is the problem in self-defense is that a firearm can only be used in a very, very narrow spectrum of use of force situations. And that is those situations that absolutely merit and warrant deadly force. Okay. When that is justified. So not only do you have to have the training in how to use it, you have to have significant training and understand the use of force law and understand how to make those decisions in the moment. Is this a moment in which it's legally justified?
Mhm.
All right. And then if it's legally justified, that doesn't necessarily mean it's tactically justified. All
Yeah.
right. You could be in a crowded environment and it's the last thing you want to do.
Yeah, with your
So,
background.
yeah. So does that make sense,
Yeah.
Chris?
Yeah. That was kind of what I was trying to lead you down with your man, you're resetting all my belief systems and correcting them because I have, I have some fantasy belief systems that really need to be changed. I can see the light now. So you're really waking me up to it, and I'm sure our audience as well. Some of my things I thought my belief system I thought made me secure. I'm like, I can see the fallacies of them now from what you told me. I'm like, yeah, I'm not really as safe as I thought I was. But yeah, what I was trying to lead you down to was, if someone does buy a gun and as you said, it's a tool, if they're not trained in it, they don't know what to, you react differently. You guys learn this as Marines in your training and in lifetime, in the field, and how to react appropriately and with logic and reason well under fire or the highest danger and you've got adrenaline rushing through you and police officers I'm sure have the same thing. They've got to be able to in spite of all the adrenaline they've got to be able to make the right decisions.
Mhm.
I think what I was trying to imply was, would it be better that people were aware not to get in those situations in the first place? That maybe not being a mark, maybe watching your environment, like we've talked about, and different things might be a better solution than buying a gun stupidly and not being trained and you just think I don't know somehow you're going to pull that out and it's going to do everything right.
Mhm. I would say fundamentally, absolutely, right?
That prevention is better than the cure.
Absolutely. So, to quote Sun Tzu to paraphrase him, right? The best victory is one in which you don't have to fight, right? So the idea here is that if you can avoid trouble and see those warning signs early on and avoid ever finding yourself in that compromised situation, then you've really won. In my little world, we have a 3-step model for how to defend any person, place, or thing. And I call it the 3D model, right? It's deny, deter, defend. And the objective here is to be able to deny opportunity, right? So how do you do that? Well, being aware, not going down the dark alleys, not putting yourself in harm's way or going places where the probability is higher of danger. But really more than that, it's about recognizing if you're being targeted, right? And any one of us can be targeted. I'll give you 2 examples of scenarios where someone could be targeted, even in a great place like Salt Lake City, right? You could be an employer, right? And you're an employer, I'm sure. And you could end up letting someone go and you could do it in the best possible manner, preserve dignity, try to set them on a positive trajectory, give them safety nets like, financial safety nets and things like that. And 6 months, 18 months later, that person can still come back and say, when you fired me, you destroyed my life. Yeah. All right. The domestic version of that is, if I can't have you, no one can. All right. Wow. People can do absolutely nothing wrong. They can handle things perfectly and still end up in situations like that. You can literally do everything right from a personal security standpoint and still end up, in the wrong place at the wrong time with a desperate predator who has no other targets but you, and thinks that they can still pull it off. Yeah. So if we can't deny opportunity, we have to be able to really accurately recognize when we are in fact in danger. When that happens, then we got to be able to deter it. And deterring it is knowing how to present yourself as a hard target and avoid, falling into that trap of opportunity and being seen as a soft target. And then if you can't deter it, then you have to be able to defend yourself. And the problem with this model is, if you don't have any defense, then it's very hard to deter bad behavior. And you're kind of left only with hoping and praying and avoiding. And so to me, yes, the objective is to avoid trouble. And the objective is to make good decisions ahead of time so that you don't put yourself in danger. But we have to recognize that it is a continuum. And without knowing how to defend yourself or having the capacity to do so, that willingness and ability, then the whole system is compromised. Okay. Because when the one facet falls apart, you're left with nothing. So what I would suggest is, whether someone's choice of defensive instrument is a firearm or self-defense, I would recommend a variety of things. I think you need to have disciplines. Like, where else do we have a situation in our lives where we decide, I don't really need any of this. I'm going to trust entirely in the lifeguards of society and the bubble wrap around us to protect me. You know what I mean? As this outsourcing of our security. I think that generally the more we do that, the more insecure we actually feel, because we recognize we're dependent, and that even a little bit, I'm talking a single self-defense class, can make a huge difference in someone's life, in their own ability to feel like they can control their own environment and their own destiny in a dangerous situation. And that could enable them to not even be seen as a target. I could share a million stories with you. I'll give you one quick example. I trained a bunch of psychologists and psychiatrists one time. They're all women. It was a women's group. They were professionals. And I was invited in to do this lunch and learn lecture. Okay. So in a lecture, we can't do any hands-on training. I mean, it's just, we have a very short amount of time. We're going to talk about how to recognize danger and avoid it, a little bit of bad guy psychology. And we did this little thing. And at the very end, I did a little demonstration of how to use improvised weapons, things like, use your cell phone, right? Use a pen, something you could put in your hand. Keys. Where to hit, how to hit. Yeah. Okay. And I just pulled someone out of the crowd, and we did 5 minutes of this, and just to give them some thought processes. Well, about a year later, I get a phone call from one of the psychologists, and she was married to another psychologist. And her husband was 72 at the time. She was 68. These are not young people. Okay. And one Friday night they're watching TV. Someone kicks in the door. It was a deranged patient of her husband's. All right. Found him, targeted him. And she talked about, as she described this, that the guy was choking the life out of her husband on the ground of their living room.
Wow.
And she said she immediately kind of froze and didn't know what to do. And then she immediately flashed back to this training, this one lecture that she had had.
Wow.
Grabbed the lamp off of the nightstand or the coffee table and hit him in the back of the neck and knocked him out.
Good
right.
for her.
And it was an amazing success story. And, the thing about this was she never even did the physical training. Yeah. She never did any practice. She had just programmed into her mind. I remember this, there was this recollection of what can I do in this situation? Mm-hmm. So there's enormous efficacy of our survival mechanisms, and the limbic part of our brain wants information about how do I handle myself in difficult, challenging circumstances. And it basically catalogs that information. If it's valid information, it comes back out in the moment of truth. Mm-hmm. And, a little bit goes a long way. Again, going back to the gun, the only difference there is if you're going to use something as complex and liability intensive and demanding competency as a firearm to even be able to use it successfully, you have to really dedicate yourself to a lot of training, and the better you want to be at self-defense in general, the more training you need. But I'm just suggesting that a little bit goes a long way and that these are life skills.
Yeah. And not to minimize that there are probably circumstances where you need a gun. But the use of the gun, it can get you in more trouble than anything. I mean, these days, even if you end up, you have someone who's a criminal who's trying to do a criminal activity against you, you end up killing them or hurting them. You end up with lawsuits from the civil side where, wrongful death lawsuits from their family. I mean, mm-hmm. It's just, when I hear people joke around, they'll be like, oh, I'll just kill the guy. And I'm like, I don't think you understand who sues people nowadays. It's mm-hmm. much more than that. I mean, maybe you don't have to worry about the law because you're on your protected territory or whatever, defending yourself. But the wrongful death lawsuits, families love filing that shit.
Yeah. Well, in the world of self-defense, okay, there a lot of people go into, you hear a lot of bad mouthing of the idea of the castle doctrines or these mm-hmm. quote, stand your ground laws. I don't know whoever coined it a stand your ground law. None of these are stand your ground laws. What they really were meant to do, and I believe, I don't know the exact number, half the country or more, maybe more, as 30 some states nowadays have some version of castle doctrine. Mm-hmm. And that's a very good thing. And what castle doctrine is, in a very simple nutshell for people to understand, is that in the old days, prior to castle doctrine, and even in the states that don't have that, if someone were to threaten you with deadly force, let's say there was a guy pulls a knife, right? Well, if you have an opportunity to retreat, you had a duty to retreat, okay, and try to get out of there and avoid any loss of life, regardless of who's wrong and who's right and whatever else, okay? Mm-hmm. But what happened was, as the case law unfolded over a long period of time, they realized that that duty to retreat has to be with complete safety. And there's virtually no circumstance where someone who is being attacked with deadly force can actually retreat with complete safety. Yeah. And so what they did was they said, okay, under a lot of circumstances, if you were a lawful person, you're not in the middle of a drug deal, you're not in the middle of the commission of another crime or something like that. Mm-hmm. If someone attacks you with deadly force, you have a justification to use deadly force to protect yourself without this duty to retreat. Now, mm-hmm. it's generally considered, if you can get away, you get away. That's the best solution. But the other facet of the castle doctrine was also to basically make you, in general, protected from that civil prosecution, right? Mm-hmm. That if you were not found criminally liable for using deadly force inappropriately, mm-hmm. Unjustifiably, then you were immune from that civil prosecution. Now, I can't say that for every state. I don't know the laws in every state, but that is the gist of what these castle doctrine things are. The old, your home is your castle, was where that came from. Mm-hmm. And the concept, though, is that you are definitively correct in that any use of force nowadays comes with it a minefield of potential problems. Deadly force, regular, just, there's only two kinds of force under the law: force and deadly force. So any kind of use of force is a potential problem, and you have to be justified. You have to know what those parameters are. And I go into that in my book, even though that's not the thrust of the book. The thrust of the book is this greater totality of how do you live ready in this uncertain world. The idea here is that I address the use of force law in a very simplistic way, because it's complicated and people just have to have a working understanding of what you can and can't do, what you should and shouldn't do.
There you go. Yeah, you've got to be able to consider, I guess, all the mitigating factors, I guess, that can come from it. It is what it is. I'm going to read your book because, you've broken down all my belief systems. I think I'm safe because of this. And you're like, no, I don't know that, Chris. So let's talk about, do you have a website where you offer and hire out your services on top of everything?
Yeah. So, livereadybook.com is kind of like the landing page that gets you to my book and is the portal into all of my, other website elements. Our company does three things. We have two companies actually, that basically collectively do these three things: preparedness, intelligence, and protection. And, on the preparedness side, that's kind of my home base. This is where I like to be, is really teaching people and organizations, how do you deal with these things? And we do a lot of workplace violence prevention training. We do a lot of active shooter response training. We actually are, way on the cutting edge of this stuff for organizations. And then for individuals, we have comprehensive training. We actually have an online program coming out that will be available there in the next month and a half. Professionally, film the whole thing. It's a tremendous program. And then we have the intelligence side, and really the intelligence side is where, we're a private investigative firm, and we do everything from background investigations to what we call threat assessments and vulnerability assessments. So a vulnerability assessment is the ability to observe or look at an environment or a place through the eyes of a bad guy and say, if this place were going to be attacked, how would it be attacked? What are the vulnerabilities? What are the weak points? And how do we shore those up? Threat assessment is, by our definition, is the determining if someone who is making threats in fact poses a threat. Okay. And it's a science, and it's an art and a science, but the concept is, lots of people make threats and act threatening. Not everybody poses a threat. Very few, actually. So if we have that disgruntled employee, if we have a situation that's very dicey, being able to articulate and define, is this in fact actionable? What would you do? When do you bring law enforcement in? How do you protect yourself or your organization? We do a lot of that in this protective intelligence mode, or vertical, if you will. And then on the protection side, we also provide for a few of our clients, and we're very selective on this, close protection services. So when they actually need lifeguards, we can provide lifeguards. But, again, I focus very heavily in the preparedness sphere and sector, because I think that's where it's at. And, like you said, it's better to avoid the problem. It's better to be able to know how to do it and avoid it in the first place than to have to defend against it.
Definitely. But I mean, you've got to be wary of all scenarios, like you said, and all that good stuff. Boy, you've really opened my eyes, man. You've made me wake up to be like, hey, you need to be a little bit more up on stuff, because the world just keeps getting a more dangerous place, and the world seems more crazy. Back in the day when we had lots of employees, I had several different run-ins with employees that we fired, and people had issues. Sometimes customers. We had some really weird customers every now and then.
I'm sure. And
I remember one time I got on my BMW and I was driving home, and about a quarter of the way home, it became very apparent that I was being followed. And I was being followed by someone we'd fired. And I don't know what his intent was. We're pretty sure that another time he came back and he didn't key my car. What he did is he took a Phillips, or not a Phillips, just a normal screwdriver, and jammed it in the lock.
Mm-hmm.
and ripped the hell out of it so that you couldn't use that lock, and of course it bent the door a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But he was pretty angry about getting fired, but he deserved it. I think he stole from us, if I recall rightly. He was a piece of shit. And but yeah, he was following me home, and I think there's some other events that we had where people would cruise my house, and there was a time where when I would come home, I would just stay in the car ready to pull out until the door closed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's I've had some weird shit. I gotten death threats from people and stuff like that before.
Yeah.
When you have a lot of companies and a lot of employees, it just kind of comes with the territory, I guess. I don't know.
It does, Chris. And I mean, I do a lot of presenting for CEOs and executive organizations. And, there might be 15 CEOs in a room and I'm doing a presentation. I'll just say, hey, by show of hands, who's here ever been threatened by an employee, either terminated employee and 9 out of 10 hands go up.
Yeah.
Okay. And the funny thing is that's not a hot topic of discussion that most of these CEOs talk about with each other. They're talking about finance and they're talking about, employee retention and things like that, leadership, but they're not going into the security, but it's ever present. And, if you just think about it statistically, right? If you have 100 employees, just for round numbers, you have 100 employees, how many statistically are going to have drug and alcohol problems, gambling problems, domestic problems, on and on and on. Yeah. The other facet to remember, and I'll just say this because I think it's critical for people, there's going to be employers, there's business owners listening to this. Never forget that 2/3 of the incidences of workplace violence are coming from the outside, right? They're not insider threats. They're not disgruntled employees or former terminated employees. They're actually outsiders. And the number one facet of that for most businesses, if you're not in healthcare, if you're not in retail, the number one facet is domestic spillover. And, the idea here is that people become blinded to that. We think so much about the insider threat of the disgruntled employee, the terminated employee, whatever it is, that we forget that things can actually be happening with our employees that are otherwise fine, but they're trying to get away from someone who then knows the only place they can go to pick that woman up, for example, is the workplace. And now you have a potential domestic violence spillover situation that turns into whatever, act of violence, threats, intimidation, mass homicide, you name it.
Yeah, I think we've had employees that, have had situations like that.
Mm-hmm.
I could have written 4 books for all my employee stories back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
I've had thousands of employees over the years, and we had a huge telemarketing contingency of people, and they're wonderful folks, but sometimes they're on the end of life that some of them they're kind of sketch.
Mm-hmm.
But even our sales guys have made lots of money. We got better at hiring quality people, and that seemed to take care of the riffraff. But you just never know.
You never know.
We've had some psychotic. We had some. We had a lot of customers every month, and every now and then we get a psychotic asshole throwing a fit in my front office, and and the guy, you couldn't talk any sort of sense to the man, and you're like, we should just keep the door locked for the rest of the day and let people in when you see them through the glass. That sort of thing.
Chris, this is exactly what we're talking about. I mean, you could have done everything right in those situations, and ultimately you're still being targeted in some fashion, right? Yep. And this is your experiences that you're talking about now, even shed a different perspective on some of the things we talked about earlier of you got to really look for trouble to find it. Well, you weren't looking for any trouble. You know what I mean? Yeah. You're being an employer. You're trying to do good by your people. You probably have fine culture, and you don't get to 1,000 employees or have thousands of employees without having being a good leader, right? And having a good business. But you're going to have people. I mean, just statistically speaking, it's going to happen. Yeah. And knowing how to manage that and spot it at the early indicators is really, really important.
Yeah, most definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I love everything in your book. I think there's something I want to touch on too that we can tease out. I think you talk about ways to help during active or maybe some concepts to use during an active shooter response. That's a big deal. travel security. I know people hunt tourists. Threat assessment, body language, warrior mindset. I need more of that. Workplace violence prevention. There's people that was one fear. We, back in the 90s when we had our big companies, that was a fear too of people coming back from being fired and shooting
Yep.
up the place. That was starting back then. So people should definitely read your book. I will definitely be reading your book as well because man, you shot through all my little belief systems. Like, I'm completely safe, and you're like, no, you're not, Chris. No, you're full of shit. And I'm like, yeah, wow.
Well, I don't want you to feel unsafe, Chris. I mean,
No,
that's
I
obviously
just feel like I need to go back to the table and learn some shit. Whatever
yeah.
I believed is not going to help me in certain situations like I thought it was.
Yeah.
Education
Well,
is key.
yeah. I mean, there's so much of our society right now that is designed to sort of create what I call the illusion of security.
Yeah.
And, whether we're talking about TSA or we're talking about all the other myriad things out there, the reality is we are the first responders. Okay. And it doesn't matter if it's 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, 1 in a million possibilities, right? It doesn't matter what the statistical probability is. If you are that one, you better know how to handle yourself because, the devastation that incident could cause you and your family is unparalleled in terms of its scope. It's in the military context, it's what we would call asymmetric, that the effect of a victimization on someone and the ripple effects throughout their lives and their family and their children and everything else, it's unparalleled. So it really requires everyone to recognize this is a vital life skill, that in today's protected society, we can all fall into that illusion of security. I live in a safe neighborhood. I don't go downtown, blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line is that bad things do happen. And we all recognize, as you do, that this is an uncertain world that we're living in. This is probably the most volatile and uncertain time that I have ever experienced in my life, and probably since World War II, that as a society we've faced. Wow. And even in World War II, we had a clear and present focus, right? We knew who the bad guys were, and generally speaking, and we knew, how we're all together on the same mission, right? A lot of uncertainty right now. And how do you grapple with that uncertainty? Well, the way you do it is you start right here and you say, okay, how prepared am I to be able to respond to a difficult situation? And how prepared is my family? And how prepared is my organization? And you literally start by taking responsibility for yourself. And that's what this is all about.
There you go. Well, I'm picking up the book and reading it because I need to up my game.
Yeah.
I just, preparedness meets opportunity. Well, you don't want to meet opportunity in this case, but opportunity will meet you, I guess.
Chance favors the prepared mind.
There you go. That's the better thing I'm looking for. So how can people reach out to you to find out more about your services and what you do there at your organization?
Yeah, you can find me on social media. All of my social media handles are Live Ready Co, Live Ready Co. Go to livereadybook.com to find me. You'll absolutely get into my website. You can send me an email, and I encourage anyone who wants to reach out to me, shoot me an email. You can find me on LinkedIn, any of the above, you name it. If you want to reach out to me directly, just go to livereadybook.com, go to the contact page, send me an email.
There you go. Well, it's been enlightening, Sam, to have you on my. You may have saved my life because I may have gotten something stupid. I'm going to need this training someday. So thank you in advance. Because
thank you, Chris.
Again, I don't always get in trouble, but I do go to Vegas every now and then. But there's that. But thank you very much, Sam, for coming on the show. Your .com's one last time as we go out.
livereadybook.com.
There you go. And folks, order up the book wherever fine books are sold. It's called Live Ready, A Guide to Protecting Yourself in an Uncertain World, December 6, 2023 by Sam Rosenberg. Thanks so much for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, linkedin.com/Chris Voss, Chris Voss 1 on the tickety-talkety, and all those crazy places on the internet. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you next time.